The letter sat on my desk for 9 years. I had found it the same night she left, set in the center of my map table, folded twice, sealed with a small press of wax that bore no crest. Just a thumbprint. I knew the handwriting before I touched it. I had spent 4 years watching her write, watching the precise, unhurried movement of her hand across vellum as she drafted the boundary charts and survey notations that kept the northern territories legible. She was the finest cartographer's assistant Ravenwall had employed in a generation, and I knew her handwriting the way I knew the shape of my own borders, by long, unconscious study. I set the letter down unopened. I told myself I would read it in the morning, when the announcement had settled and the council was quieter and I had slept. I told myself many things that night. I am the Alpha King of Ravenwall, and I had spent 31 years being very good at knowing what my duty was, and rather slower to know what my heart was doing, while duty occupied my attention. I had accepted the Lady of Fenmark's hand that afternoon. It was a sound match. Her father's territory controlled the Eastern Pass, and the agreement had taken 2 years of careful negotiation to reach. My counsel was relieved, and made no attempt to conceal it. My wolf was not relieved. He had been restless from the moment the formal documents were signed, in the way of an animal that has been shown a destination it does not believe in, and he had spent the evening doing something he rarely did inside the hold, pacing, round and round the edges of the same room, with the low, focused attention of an animal that has lost a scent, and knows the direction it came from and cannot go there. I had chosen to interpret this as ordinary agitation at a significant change. I was practiced at choosing useful interpretations. The letter waited on my desk. In the morning I folded it into the back of the bound survey ledger that Sarah had been using, her notes still penciled in the margins, small and unhurried, the measurements precise to a half degree, and I put the ledger in the locked chest where I kept documents of standing. I meant to read it when things were calmer. Things were not calm for quite some time after that. The Fenmark alliance required ceremonies, dispatches, a formal visit from her father's pack to confirm the passage rights arrangement, and then a second visit, when the passage rights required amendment, and then the wedding itself, at which I stood at the appropriate stone and spoke the appropriate vows with the gravity they deserved. And then there was the adjustment to sharing a table in a hold with a woman who was accomplished and courteous and thoughtful about politics, and with whom I could carry on an excellent conversation about trade routes and territorial administration, and whom I could never quite stop measuring, in the quietest part of my mind, against an absence I could not name. I tried not to do this. It was not fair. Dara, the Lady of Fenmark, my wife, had not asked to be part of an arrangement that satisfied everyone at the council table, and no one who actually lived within it, and she was a good woman, and she deserved better than a husband who was aware, all through the first winter of their marriage, that the cartography annex now had a different assistant in it, and he did not know why he kept noticing this, and why the noticing had a quality that the noticing of ordinary administrative changes did not. I managed the awareness the way I managed a great many things. I organized it carefully, and declined to take it out and examine it. My wolf continued, at intervals, to pace. Dara died in the 3rd year of our marriage. A fever, swift and terrible and final. We had found a kind of working closeness in those 3 years, a mutual respect that had grown into something I would not have called warmth precisely, but which had been genuine and careful and dignified, and I mourned her death with the full gravity it warranted, because she had been good, and she had been mine, in the sense that duty makes people yours, and I knew that she had deserved a better version of that than the one I had been able to give. I stayed in formal mourning for the season. Then I governed. That is what I do. 6 more years passed. I governed well. Ravenwall's borders held. The Eastern Pass Alliance continued to serve its purposes. The harvest routes were profitable. The northern packs were stable. My wolves were fed and protected. My court functioned. I attended every council meeting, reviewed every dispatch, heard every complaint brought to the hold by any citizen of my territory who needed hearing. By every measure that courts apply to their kings, I was performing adequately. On most mornings I did not think about the cartography annex or the quality of the light through its south window in the late afternoons, or about a particular ledger with penciled margin notes, or about the number 43, which is how many paces it is from the map table to my study door, on most mornings. The letter remained in the locked chest. I was aware of it the way you are aware of something you have decided, each season, to deal with later. Not forgotten, not quite ignored, but filed. The way you file things you have recognized, without admitting that you have recognized them, are not safe to look at directly. The night I opened it, it was 3 in the morning and the hold was quiet enough that I could hear the wind off the northern bay pressing against the shutters with a low, steady persistence. I had been lying awake for 2 hours. My wolf had been pacing again, not with urgency, not with distress, but with that particular restless circling that meant something had shifted somewhere, in the wide territory of things he paid attention to before I did, and he had noticed it and I had not, and he was going to pace until I noticed too. I got up, lit the lamp on my desk, sat down. The locked chest was 6 paces away. I opened it, ostensibly in search of a land grant document I needed for the following morning's council review. And there was the survey ledger. And there, tucked just inside the front cover where I must have moved it at some point without noting the occasion, was the letter. Still sealed, the wax still carrying that small, featureless thumbprint. I sat with it for a long time. My wolf went still. The wind pressed at the shutters. The lamp burned steadily. I turned the letter over in my hands twice, as though checking for something I already knew was not there, and then I broke the seal. She had written 4 pages. Her handwriting was exactly as I remembered it, precise, unhurried, the letters well-formed and evenly spaced, the lines straight without being ruled. She had drafted this letter with care. I could see that in the quality of the writing. This was not a letter dashed off in grief or anger. She had thought about it. Even in leaving, she had been careful with the words she left behind, because that was what she did with things that mattered to her. She did not plead. I want you to understand this, because I think it is the thing about her that most people would not have expected, and the thing about her that I had always known, and the thing about her that I had spent 4 years not looking at directly because it frightened me in the way that things you have not named are often more frightening than the things you have. She did not plead. There was nothing in those 4 pages that asked me to reconsider, or argued that she would have been a better choice than the Lady of Fenmark, or positioned herself as wronged by what I had done. She was not that kind of woman. I had known it for 4 years. What she did was describe. She described what the 4 years at Ravenwall had been, the work itself, the surveys, the boundary recalibrations, the long afternoons in the annex with the particular smell of ink and linen, and the cold north light through the south window in winter, and the warm amber of it in late summer, when the sun came in low. She described the texture of the hold as a working place, the rhythms of the scribes and archivists who moved through it, the way the great stone corridors sounded differently in rain, the way Ravenwall in autumn had its own particular smell of wet stone and wood smoke, and the mountain oaks shedding, and in spring when the snowmelt ran off the eastern face you could hear the wolves running the moorland at dawn, if the annex window was open. She described all of this with the same precision she brought to her maps, the same patient attention to what was actually there rather than what convention said should be there, and it was clear from the first page that she had loved the place, not with romance or sentiment, but with the unadorned, functional depth of someone who has genuinely looked at something for 4 years and understood what it was. Then she described what it had been like to notice me. Not in the way one notices a king, she wrote. She had not been in awe of me. I was the alpha king of Ravenwall, and she treated that with the respect it warranted, but she was a practical woman, and what she paid attention to was the actual quality of a thing rather than its title. She had noticed me the way you notice a landmark on a map you have been tracing long enough to know its shape by heart, gradually, and then all at once, and then in a way that changes the map's character, because landmarks alter how you orient to everything around them. She had not planned it. She had not done anything about it, because she was clear-eyed about the arithmetic of what she was and what I was, and she did not think it was useful to want things that the arithmetic made impossible. But she had noticed. And then, on the second page, she described the morning she had understood that noticing was not all of it. There had been a morning, 2 years into her work at Ravenwall, when I had come into the annex before the rest of the staff arrived and found her alone at the upper shelves, pulling down a large survey roll. She had been on the top rung of the rolling ladder with both hands occupied, and the ladder had caught on an uneven floorboard and shifted, and I had steadied it without thinking. One hand on the rail, the reflexive action of someone passing close to an unstable thing. I had been in the annex on a separate errand entirely and had barely registered it. I had left without another thought about it. She had not been able to stop thinking about it. Not because of what I had done, she wrote, and she was careful here. The word she used was steadied, not rescued, and the precision of that, in the middle of the night in the lamplight with the letter on my desk, caught me somewhere I had not expected to be caught, not because of the steadying itself, but because of what had happened in the moment I touched the rail, a warmth that moved up her arm and into her shoulder, and settled behind her sternum with a quality she did not have a name for until, later, she read the old accounts of what the mate bond felt like in the first moments, and she recognized the description from the inside. She had not been certain, in the moment. She was a practical woman, and practical women do not stake too much on a single warmth on a ladder. There were other explanations. She had considered them all, but the warmth had come again, and again after that, and again. Reliably, whenever I was near enough. In the annex, at council meetings she attended as a cartographic reference. In the great hall at the seasonal ceremonies when the whole pack assembled and I moved through the room in the manner of someone who was very busy and had many people to speak with and no reason to be aware of a specific figure near the map table at the east wall. She had mapped it the way she mapped everything, with careful, unhurried attention to the conditions that produced it and the conditions that did not, until she had accumulated what she considered reliable data. And she had drawn her survey lines with her precise hands and, in the margins of her working ledger, the one I was now holding with the letter tucked inside it, she had noted the exact distance from her desk to various fixed points in the hold, because that was what she did when she was thinking about something. She measured it. "I am certain," she wrote, "that you have never once thought about how far your study is from the cartography annex. I have known it was 43 paces since the second winter I was here." My wolf made a sound I had not heard him make before. Not a howl. Not a growl, something quieter and more complicated than either, that belonged to a register below language, the register where things are simply acknowledged, without dispute or ceremony. She had intended, she wrote, to live with this indefinitely. She was not under the illusion that I felt the same thing. She had watched me for 4 years and I had given no indication of it, and she had considered 3 explanations: that the bond was not equal on my side, that I had suppressed it in the ordinary business of ruling, or that I simply had not noticed. All 3 were possible. She thought the third most likely, though she acknowledged the second was plausible. She was not writing to tell me this because she expected something from it. She was writing because she could not leave Ravenwall without leaving a true record of it somewhere, even a record that was never read, because she was by training and by nature a keeper of accurate records, and it felt dishonest to carry 4 years of maps out of the hold when the most significant thing that had happened to her there had not been written down anywhere. "I ask nothing," she had written. "I want nothing that is not freely given. I only want there to be an accurate record, in case it ever matters to anyone." She signed it, Sarah. No title. No formal close, just her name. I sat at my desk for a long time after I finished reading. The mate mark had come to life on my left wrist somewhere in the middle of the second page. I had not noticed it at first. There had been a warmth, climbing from my hand toward my elbow, that I had taken for the lamplight and then for some atmospheric change, and then, when I felt it settle behind my sternum with the particular, unmistakable quality she had described, I had understood it for what it was. By the time I reached her signature, the mark was fully formed, silver pale in the lamplight, the interlocked lines I had waited apparently 11 years to see, without knowing that waiting was what I was doing. My wolf was not pacing. He had gone very still, with the stillness of an animal that has finally understood what it was doing all those years it circled. I set the letter on the desk. I had found it the night she left and not opened it for 9 years. I held that fact in front of me without looking away from it, without reaching for a useful interpretation or a more comfortable frame. Not guilt, exactly, though there was guilt. Not grief, though I recognized that too. Something more like the sensation of looking at a survey chart and discovering that a landmark you have always believed was in one location is in fact elsewhere, and that every route you plotted in confidence from that false position has been running on an error you did not make because you were careless, but because you declined, over and over, to check the actual coordinates. The territory had not changed. The error was mine, and it was in the charting, and it had been there since the beginning. I went to the window. The northern bay lay dark between the ice formations, the water black and still. Somewhere beyond the edge of what I could see, the coast road ran north toward Morwick. I had known she was in Morwick. I had known this for 9 years, in the manner of someone who makes it his business to know a thing without examining why he needs to know it. 6 months after she left Ravenwall, a border steward's routine report had mentioned, in the same paragraph as a note about the herring harvest, that a skilled cartographer had arrived in the fishing village on the northern bay and was doing excellent work for the local communities. I had filed the information in the same chest as the letter. I had told myself this was administrative thoroughness. It was a lie I had maintained for 9 years to a very small audience of 1. I had known where she was. I had simply not gone there. I was on the road before first light. Harwick, who has served me since I was 17 and has the courage of a man who is not physically large and not afraid of anyone who is, found me pulling my own saddle off the rack in the stable yard and informed me that 3 riders would accompany me at minimum and that he did not care what my opinion was on this matter. I conceded the 3 riders without argument, which may have alarmed him. We left Ravenwall as the sky began to pale at the eastern edge, the hold still quiet behind us, the frozen road ahead running pale and straight through the moorland toward the coast. 4 hours to Morwick in good conditions. The conditions were not good. Fresh snow from the night before, the coast road icing over where it curved around the headland. We went carefully. I was not, surprisingly, impatient. I had waited 9 years in the wrong direction. I could give 4 hours to the correct one. And I needed those 4 hours. I had been very good, for a very long time, at knowing what to say in official contexts, and what I needed to say to Sarah at the end of this road was not official in any sense I knew how to prepare for. A king's apology is a particular thing. It sounds significant and arrives with very little weight, because it comes from the position of power and the recipient always knows this. And the unspoken note underneath every king's apology is that the king has determined this is a moment that warrants one, which makes the apology still fundamentally organized around the king. I did not want to give Sarah that. She had always been too precise for it to do any real work. She would hear the structure underneath the words and note it, the way she noted false readings in a chart, and it would not land where I needed it to land. I thought about what she had written. I ask nothing. I want nothing that is not freely given. I thought about what it would mean, after 9 years, to offer something that was genuinely not arranged. I thought about whether I fully understood the difference between offering and deciding for someone else, and I thought I probably did not understand it as completely as I needed to before I arrived at her door. But the alternative was to go back to Ravenwall and keep sitting with the knowledge that I had found her letter the night she left, and had not opened it for 9 years, and that was no longer something I could do. Morwick appeared on the headland just before noon. Stone houses low against the frozen bay, a working harbor with 3 fishing boats moored in the ice, the smell of salt and wood smoke rising from the shore. It was a small place, purposeful and self-contained, known primarily for its herring trade and the quality of its ice charts, and its people had no particular reason to be impressed by a king's bearing or a king's retinue. I found this, arriving with 3 riders and the kind of posture that 30 years of ruling tends to build into a person, to be a relief. I asked the first person I found, a woman mending a net on the harbor steps, where the cartographer lived. She looked at me without much deference. She had the look of someone who would extend courtesy to a traveler and did not consider his rank relevant to whether she felt like answering. "Sarah, up the hill, second gate on the left. She doesn't usually want visitors when she's working." "I'll take that risk," I said. The house was small and well built, stone like the rest of the village, with a window on the south side that looked out over the frozen bay. The gate was latched but not locked. I told my 3 riders to stay at it and went to the door alone. I knocked. A pause, the sounds of the interior settling in response to the interruption. A chair pushed back, footsteps, unhurried. Then the door opened. She had changed in 9 years, and she had not. The precision was still there, in the way she stood in the doorway, in the way her eyes moved from my face to the riders at her gate and back again, taking in the information and organizing it before she spoke, exactly as she had always done. She was older, as we both were. There were ink stains on her fingers. She was holding a pencil. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. "Your Majesty," she said. Her voice was level. She had always been good at level. "I read your letter," I said. The pencil stopped moving in her fingers. Something in her face shifted. Not dramatically. A small, precise shift. The kind that is visible only to someone who has spent 4 years learning to read a particular face across a particular room. "I wondered if you ever would," she said. "Last night." "Ah." She was quiet for a moment, taking that in with the same care she gave everything. Then, "Would you like to come in? It's cold." The house inside was exactly what I would have expected from her. Orderly, functional, with the quality of personal intelligence in its arrangement that made a small space feel larger than it was. Survey rolls stacked in wooden frames along the east wall. A work table under the south window, with charts spread and weighted at the corners. Books, not for display but for use, their spines worn at the grip points. A lamp that was doing actual work rather than decorating a table. A small iron stove that had brought the room to a temperature that genuinely served a person rather than performing warmth for a visitor's benefit. She set her pencil on the work table, turned to face me fully. "Before you say what you've come to say," she said, with careful steadiness, "I want you to know that I am well here. I have work I value and a life I have built without waiting for anything to alter it. I am not in need of being rescued from this. I would like you to understand that before you speak, because I think it will matter to how you say what you intend to say." I had rehearsed several versions of what to say during the 4 hours on the road. None of them survived the first 30 seconds in her presence. They had all been very good at sounding like an alpha king taking responsibility, articulate, grave, weighted with appropriate acknowledgement, and they had all been fundamentally still about me, organized around me, framed in my terms. She would have heard that immediately. "I know," I said, "you have always been good at making a life where you are. That was one of the many things I noticed about you, and did not name, and I now understand that I did not name things on purpose, because naming things requires looking at them directly." She was watching me with the attentiveness she brought to anything that required accurate reading. The kind of attention that does not hurry and does not flinch. I found your letter the night you left, I said. I set it aside. I told myself I would read it when things were calmer. Things were not calm for a long time, and when they were calm, I still did not read it, because I had understood by then that I was afraid of what it contained. You are precise. Whatever you had written would be precisely true, and I did not know what it would do to me to read something precisely true about the things I had been declining to look at directly. I paused. That is not an explanation. I am not offering it as one. I am telling you what happened, because you wrote that you wanted an accurate record, and it seemed right to give you one in return. Something in her expression changed. A small warming, a slight softening at the edges of that careful attention. Last night, I said, I opened it, and while I was reading the second page, the part about the ladder and the 43 paces, my voice had taken on a quality I was not entirely managing. I gave it a moment. While I was reading that page, the mate mark came. Here. I held out my left wrist. In the gray winter light from her window, the mark was clearly visible. Silver pale, interlocked lines, settled into the skin. Sarah went very still. She looked at the mark for a long moment, with a quality of attention that was different from her ordinary precision, something older and quieter than precision. Then she looked up at me. That should have come years ago, she said. Yes, because it was already there, on my side, for 9 years. Something moved through me that I do not have an accurate word for, not surprise exactly. I had understood this, reading her letter. But there is a difference between understanding something and hearing the person say it plainly in a room where the North Bay light is coming through the window and she is standing 4 paces away, and you are finally, after 11 years of circling, in the actual territory rather than charting it from a safe distance. Show me, I said, quietly. She turned her right wrist over. The mark was there, older than mine, the same interlocked pattern, but settled into her skin, with the ease of something long established. Something that had been given 9 years to become part of the landscape of her. Hers on the right wrist, mine on the left. We looked at them together. The silence in the room had a quality to it I recognized from the letter, the quality of an accurate record being acknowledged. Then the side door opened. 3 of her neighbors came in, apparently on some routine errand involving a bucket of salt that one of them was carrying, and they took in the scene, the Alpha King of Ravenwall, standing in Sarah's front room, both of them with their wrists turned upward, the marks clearly visible in the winter light coming through the south window. The neighbor holding the bucket said, "Oh," in the tone of someone who has just realized they have walked into the middle of something significant. The mark on my wrist pulsed once, warm, in the direction of Sarah's. I looked at her. She looked at me. "I came here to ask you something," I said. "I did not come to tell you what you will do, or to make decisions that belong to you, or to assume that 9 years and an old letter have earned me more than the right to speak plainly. You wrote that you want nothing that is not freely given. I am trying to meet that. I am asking if you will hear what I am asking, and then decide for yourself." She nodded once. "I cannot give you the 9 years back," I said. "I cannot give you the 4 before that, when I had you at Ravenwall and spent them declining to look at what I was not looking at. I can tell you that I read your letter, and that it was the most precisely true thing I have read in 9 years, and that I have spent the last 12 hours understanding clearly what I chose and what that choice cost." I steadied myself, and I am here, now, asking if you will give me the chance to be better than I was. "To come back," she said, clarifying, not questioning. "If you're willing, as my mate, as my Luna, not because a king needs an alliance, or a council needs a match, or because the political arithmetic requires it, but because I am 40 years old and I finally understand what that mark on your wrist has been telling me, and I would rather spend what remains being the man who did right by you than the man who had the letter and did not open it." I paused. That is the whole of it. I am asking, not commanding, asking. She was quiet for a long time. The neighbor with the bucket whispered something. The snow had started again outside. Light, steady, the ordinary winter snow of the northern coast. "You rode through the night," she said. "I rode at first light. I wanted to wait until morning. Arriving in the dark seemed a poor beginning. Harwick made you take 3 riders. He would not negotiate on fewer." The corner of her mouth moved, the smallest structural predecessor of a smile, the one I had seen in the annex in the late afternoons when something had pleased her and she had no intention of making a performance of it. 43 paces, she said. "I know the number now," I said. She looked at the mark on her wrist, then at mine. Then she reached out and placed 2 fingers against the mark on my wrist, lightly, carefully, the way she always handled things she wanted to understand, rather than simply react to. The warmth was not subtle. It moved from my wrist to my shoulder and settled behind my sternum, and I recognized it then. Had always known it, I understood in that moment, and had spent years declining to look at it directly. My wolf made that quiet, complicated sound. Then he lay down, in the way of an animal that has finally arrived at the place it was going, and has no further need to pace. Sarah lifted her fingers. "I will need to finish the Morwick survey," she said. "I gave the harbor master my word that it would be done before the spring thaw. I do not leave work unfinished." "How long?" 6 weeks, perhaps 8. "I can wait," I said. "I have been waiting 9 years in the wrong direction. 8 weeks in the right one is nothing." Something settled in her expression. The attentiveness gentled, became less like reading and more like recognizing. "You will go back to Ravenwall," she said. "I will finish the survey. I will come when it is done." Stated, not argued. A coordinate measured and found to be true. "And when I come, you will introduce me to the court as your mate. Not as an arrangement, not as an administrative category. The actual thing, in terms that leave no room for the court to misplace what I am to you." "Yes. And Harwick will need to know in advance. He worries about transitions." "I will tell him tonight." She nodded once, with the resolution of something decided by someone who decides things correctly. Then she stepped forward and took my hands, both of them, properly, the marked wrists aligned, and the bond that had been sitting quietly in both of us for 9 years, and 4 before that, came fully alive with the simple, unhurried certainty of something that has always known it would arrive here. The neighbor with the salt bucket said, to no one in particular, "Well, that's been a long time coming." Sarah did not look away from me, but her mouth moved in what was, this time, definitively a smile. "Yes," she said, "it has." I stayed in Morwick that night, in the room above the harbor master's hall that Harwick's youngest rider secured without difficulty. I spent the evening at Sarah's work table while she explained the survey to me, the ice shifts in the bay, the changing depth lines that the fishing boats needed charted each year, the 3 sections of the harbor wall that were eroding in ways the village council had not yet fully grasped. I looked at her charts the way I had always looked at her charts, with the understanding that they were more reliable than most other things in a room. She made tea. She asked about the Eastern Pass and the state of the trade agreements. I told her. She listened with the focused, specific attention of someone who has been paying careful attention to a territory's history and wants to understand where she falls in the sequence of it. We did not speak again about the letter. There was nothing left to say about it that had not been said precisely, in the letter itself and in the 12 words she had offered me in the room while her neighbor held a bucket of salt. She was not the kind of woman who turned a thing over repeatedly after it had been understood and placed in its correct position. In the morning I rode south. Harwick received the news with the expression of a man who has waited a considerable time to receive it and is handling the relief with great personal discipline. I told the council at the formal meeting of the week, plainly, the Alpha King of Ravenwall had found his fated mate, and she would come to the hold when her contracted work was complete, because she kept her commitments, and the hold would be prepared to receive her as Luna. The council recalculated the implications. I waited without concern for their conclusions, because the conclusions were not, in this instance, a matter subject to negotiation. 8 weeks. I put Ravenwall in order the way a man organizes things when he has finally located the center of gravity and can arrange everything else around it correctly, rather than trying to hold everything in place through management and careful interpretation. The cartography annex was refurbished. The south window, she had written, was very good. The rolling ladder was examined. The 43 paces between the map table and my study were, for the first time, a measurement I understood the purpose of. On the 49th day, a rider came from Morwick with a short note in her handwriting. "The survey is complete. The harbor master has signed the final pages. I will arrive in 3 days if the road holds." The road held. She came in the late afternoon of the 3rd day, alone, having declined the escort I had sent, on the grounds that she had managed the road perfectly well without one, arriving with her own horse and 3 saddlebags of survey rolls and the ordered practicality of a woman who does not pack more than she intends to use. Harwick met her at the gate with a warmth he rarely displayed for arrivals at Ravenwall and an umbrella, because it had begun to snow lightly, which is the kind of detail Harwick attends to for people he has decided belong in his care. I met her in the great hall. The court was assembled in the ordinary course of the supper hour, because I had not staged a ceremony. Sarah would not have wanted one organized for the court's benefit, and she would have known immediately that it had been, and she would have stood in it with patient precision and noted everything it was doing that was not genuinely about her. When she came in from the east corridor in her traveling cloak, with ink on her fingers and snow melting in her hair, I crossed the hall to her because it was the obvious thing to do, and I was, at last, doing the obvious things. I took her hands. The marks aligned. The warmth moved between them, steady and unhurried, the way it would move between us for the rest of our lives. She looked up at me with that precision, and in it now something warmer than calculation. Something that had been in the letter, in the 43 paces, in the warmth on the ladder, that she had been too practical to stake too much on, until she had reliable data. "The floorboard in the annex," she said quietly. "You fixed it." I had it checked. There was nothing wrong with the floorboard. I checked it myself the day I left. The ladder slipped because the wheel was off-center. I had the wheel checked as well. Was it off-center? Slightly. The corner of her mouth. The structural predecessor. Then, quietly, the thing itself. "All right," she said. I covered her shoulders with my own cloak. Not ceremony, not a gesture for the hall that was watching. She was cold from the road and I was warm, and it was the obvious thing, and I had been wrong about obvious things for long enough that I was going to do them when they were in front of me. She let me. Behind us, the court was reaching the conclusions I had told them, in somewhat more direct terms than I usually employed, they would be reaching. I did not turn to observe the process. The conclusions were not the main thing. That evening, after supper, she asked to see the map table where her letter had sat. I showed her. It was a good table, wide, solid, with the south window to its left, the light she had written about coming in low and amber in the late afternoons. She put her hand flat on the surface and was quiet for a moment. "It is 43 paces from here to your study," she said. "I know," I said. She left her hand on the table. I set mine beside it, not over it, not claiming anything that had not been offered. Simply beside it, close enough that the warmth moved between the marks. "I mapped everything," she said quietly. "Every boundary and depth line and trade route in the Northern Territory. But not this." "No," I said. "I did not make it mappable. You did, eventually. You drew the first lines. I only had to learn to read them." She turned to look at me. In the lamplight, with the south window dark behind her and the snow still coming down outside, I saw her the way I had seen her for 4 years across an annex and then for 9, in the particular stubborn way that things you have refused to look at directly still manage to stay with you. The precision and the warmth of her. The quiet dignity of a woman who had left an accurate record and trusted it to arrive when it was needed, even without knowing whether it would ever be read. I had kept her letter for 9 years without opening it, but I had kept it. I know that is not an exculpation. It is simply a fact. Sarah has always preferred facts. She stayed. Not because I am king. Not because the mark required it. Not because the court needed it or because the 9 years had produced a debt she was settling. Because the bond had been there for 13 years, and she had mapped it with her usual precision and found it to be exactly where she had always believed it was, and now that I had finally arrived at the same coordinate, she saw no further reason to maintain the distance between where she stood and where the map said home was. The survey rolls she brought from Morwick went into the cartography annex. The south window, she said, in winter, would do. She was right. The court learned to bring the cartographic questions directly to her because her answers were more accurate. The village stewards learned that a note requesting the Luna's attention on a boundary question would be addressed in order and with precision. The hunting parties learned to ask her which routes were safe along the northern bay, because her ice charts were the best the territory had produced in a generation. Harwick, who has the dignity not to say things that do not need saying even when he could, said nothing whatsoever on the subject. He simply, one morning, moved the rolling ladder in the cartography annex to the south wall, where the light was better and the floor was even, and went back to his work. The mark on my wrist has settled now to the same quality as hers, interlocked, quiet, as at rest as something that has been in its correct position for a long time and is not going anywhere. My wolf, who paced for 9 years in the absence of what he had always known was missing, sleeps through the night. The letter is still in the locked chest. I did not burn it, and I did not frame it. It is a document of record, and it belongs where records are kept. In the annex, beside the south window, there is now a new ledger. Sarah's, the Morwick survey, the ice patterns of the northern bay charted for the next generation of fishermen, in a notation system more accurate than anything the territory has had before. Her handwriting in the margins is the same as it was 13 years ago, precise, unhurried, the letters well-formed and evenly spaced. I know, now, exactly how far the map table is from my study. 43 paces. She measured it true in the second winter she was here, and she has always been the better cartographer.